At Jefferson High School, deep in rural Georgia, Mr. Henderson had been untouchable for years. He didn't wear a hood, but everyone knew. He didn't see all students as equal. The way he snapped at black kids, docked their grades, mocked their voices, it was all routine. A quiet kind of violence no one dared call out. Then came Jaylen. 14, soft-spoken, skin dark as oak, eyes always watching. He was smart, top of his class, and that made him a target. One morning, in front of the whole class, Mr. Henderson berated him for talking back, forced him to stand while calling him arrogant and ungrateful. The class fell silent. Jaylen stood there, humiliated, and didn't say a word. What no one knew was that Jaylen's silence wasn't weakness. His mother? A civil rights attorney. The moment was filmed, and what started as another routine humiliation went viral. Now the school board is scrambling. The teacher's facing consequences for the first time in his career. And Jaylen? He's no longer just a student. They thought it would go like it always had. But this time, they picked the wrong kid. Megaphone, what would you do if your child was treated like this, in front of everyone? Bell subscribe if you believe silence shouldn't protect injustice. Thumbs up like if you know intelligence comes in all shades. Speech balloon comment your city and whether schools in your area are still stuck in the past. Jaylen lived with his mom in a small, weathered apartment complex on the south side of town. It wasn't much, but it was always clean, the kind of clean that comes from people who've had to prove they're good enough their whole lives. His mom, Rochelle, was a civil rights attorney. Not the flashy kind, but the kind who had quietly taken down police departments and discriminatory school policies in court and won. But despite all that, she always told Jaylen, pick your battles, and when you do, win. Jaylen was 14, tall for his age, quiet, thoughtful. He liked building things, sketching things, solving puzzles in his head. At school, he kept his head down, aced his assignments, and stayed out of trouble. But none of that ever seemed to matter to Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson had been teaching at Jefferson High for over 20 years. To some parents, he was old school, strict, traditional, no-nonsense. But to the students, especially the black ones, he was something else. He talked to them like they were always on the verge of messing up, called them boy, mispronounced their names, graded their work with a sneer, and if you dared speak up, he'd make an example out of you in front of the whole class. Jaylen had always managed to stay off his radar until he didn't. It started small. A paper returned with a C-, even though Jaylen knew it was solid work. Comments like you're getting cocky or try using your own words next time. Jaylen brought it home to his mom, and she raised an eyebrow. You want me to step in? She asked. He shook his head. Not yet. Jaylen wasn't scared. He was just calculating. At school, most of the other kids liked him. He wasn't loud, but he listened. He helped when he could. There was Maya, who sat next to him in math and always gave him her extra pencils, and Andre, his neighbor, who joked too loud in the hallway, but would have your back in a second. They noticed the way Mr. Henderson talked to Jaylen, but no one said anything, because that's how it had always been. For years, for everyone who looked like them. Then came the moment that shifted everything. It was a Tuesday morning. Overcast. Everyone was half asleep. Jaylen had answered a question in history class, calmly, confidently, and correctly. Mr. Henderson froze, turned slowly, and said, "You always have something to say, don't you?" The class got quiet. "I just answered the question," Jaylen replied. "Stand up." Jaylen stood. Mr. Henderson walked over and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You've got a real attitude problem. You people never learn when to stay in your place." There it was. No one moved. No one breathed. Maya looked down. Andre clenched his jaw. Jaylen stood there, hands by his sides, eyes locked forward. But what Mr. Henderson didn't see, what no one saw, was the student in the back pulling out her phone. Quietly, carefully, hitting record. Jaylen didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The tension was thick for the rest of the period. When the bell rang, Jaylen walked out, calm as ever. But his heart was thudding in his chest. Not from fear, from clarity. At home that night, he told his mom what happened. Her face went still. "You ready?" she asked. Jaylen nodded. Good, she said, because now it's his turn to answer some questions. And that's when everything started to change. The next morning at school, Jaylen felt the shift before he stepped through the front doors. The air was thicker. People looked at him a beat too long. Whispers slid across the hallway like wind. He didn't flinch, just kept walking. He had stayed up late the night before. After telling his mom what happened, she asked him to write everything down, every word, every moment, every look. Document it, she said. The law cares about details. Jaylen didn't need convincing. He wrote until his hand cramped. What he didn't know was that the video had already started spreading. The girl who filmed it, Serena, hadn't said a word to him since. She just uploaded the clip with no caption. No hashtags. Just raw footage. Mr. Henderson singling Jaylen out. The words, the tone, the silence in the room. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't edited. That's what made it hit harder. It looked real, because it was real. By second period, Jaylen's phone was vibrating nonstop in his pocket. Friends, strangers, classmates who had never looked twice at him were now stopping in the hallway to say, "Yo, that was messed up." A few nodded at him with a quiet kind of respect. Others avoided his eyes completely. In the teacher's lounge, Henderson must have seen it too. By third period, Mr. Henderson was waiting for Jaylen. As Jaylen walked in, the man's face was tight, jaw locked, eyes colder than usual. "Sit down," he said sharply, before Jaylen even reached his desk. "We're not playing games today." Jaylen didn't respond. He just sat, but the damage was already done. The room fell off. The students around him were unusually quiet. No one laughed. No one dared open their mouth. That day, Mr. Henderson called on Jaylen over and over, each time interrupting him, mocking his answers, smirking when he stumbled on a date. At one point, he said, "Maybe if you spent less time thinking you're a victim and more time studying, you wouldn't embarrass yourself." There were gasps. Jaylen kept his composure, but his knuckles were white around the pencil he was gripping. After class, Andre caught up to him. "Man, you good?" Jaylen nodded. "He's trying to get a reaction." "Yeah, well, he's making himself look worse." Jaylen didn't say it out loud, but he knew it was working. Mr. Henderson was unraveling. Slowly, publicly. But then came the blow Jaylen didn't expect. That afternoon, he was called into the assistant principal's office. "Jaylen," said Ms. Green, folding her hands, "we received a report from Mr. Henderson claiming you've been disrespectful, disruptive, and insubordinate in his classroom. We take these concerns seriously." Jaylen stared at her. "You're putting me under review?" he asked. "No one's being punished yet," she said quickly. "This is just a formal process. But for the time being, you'll be placed in a different section for history." Jaylen looked down, then up. "So he humiliates me, gets caught on camera, and I'm the one removed." Ms. Green sighed. "This is about de-escalation." He didn't say anything, because if he did, he'd explode. When he got home, Rochelle was already on the phone with the school board. She was calm, surgical. Jaylen had never seen her in full lawyer mode before. "If you remove my son from class for your employee's misconduct, that's not de-escalation. That's retaliation. And that's illegal. Would you like me to send you the statute?" Jaylen just stood there, watching her speak power like it was her second language. But even so, that night, something in him cracked. He sat on his bed, head in hands, feeling the weight of it all. The shame, the silence, the rage. It wasn't just about Henderson anymore. It was about a system that knew what he did and still chose to protect him. For the first time, Jaylen questioned whether staying quiet, playing it smart, was worth it. Whether being calm and composed was just another way of being ignored. His mom came in quietly. "You don't have to be the strong one all the time," she said. "I'm tired of this," he said, his voice low, "of being the one who has to carry it right. Talk right. Sit still. Be polite while they break me." Rochelle sat beside him. "So stop carrying it alone." He looked up. "We're not done," she said. "We're just getting started." And in that moment, something hardened in Jaylen. Not bitterness, but resolve. The next day, he walked back into school with his head high. Not angry. Not loud. Just ready. Because now, it wasn't just about surviving the injustice. It was about confronting it. No more shrinking. No more silence. This wasn't just about a teacher. It was about the whole damn system. And Jaylen had decided he wasn't playing by their rules anymore. Jaylen walked into school the next day with something new in his chest. Intention. He wasn't just here to get through the day anymore. He was here to be seen. He didn't have to say anything. The video had already done the talking. Views were climbing fast. His name was being whispered in corners. That's him. That's the kid. Some students gave him a nod in the hallway. Others just stared. Jaylen kept his shoulders square and his eyes steady. But Mr. Henderson? He acted like nothing had happened. Like he wasn't trending on local TikTok accounts. Like he hadn't become a national example of everything wrong with the way black students were treated in American classrooms. In third period, Jaylen walked past Henderson's classroom without stopping. He was officially transferred out, but something in him wanted to go in there, just stand in the doorway, and look that man in the eye. He didn't. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the library. It started as a place to hide, but that morning, something changed. Ms. Ramirez, the librarian, waved him over quietly. She had never really spoken to him before, aside from the usual shoo. She leaned in and said, "I saw the video. That was not okay. Just so you know, you're not alone." Jaylen blinked. "Thanks." "You ever heard of the Youth Legal Alliance?" she asked. He shook his head. She handed him a flyer. They help students who've been discriminated against in school. Lawyers, mentors, even media training. Media training? "Thought your mom might want to see this," she added. Jaylen nodded slowly. "Thanks. Really." It was the first time someone from inside the school gave him more than a shrug. That night, he showed the flyer to Rochelle. She read it, smiled slightly, and said, "Looks like you're building your own team." They sent an email. The response came back fast. 3 days later, Jaylen sat on a Zoom call with a lawyer named Theo Jenkins. Young, sharp, and black, he had the kind of energy that filled the room even through a screen. "I saw the footage," Theo said. "You're calm, under pressure?" That was power. Jaylen shrugged. Didn't feel like power. Theo smiled. "That's because we're taught that power has to be loud. It doesn't. Sometimes it's just refusing to flinch." They talked for over an hour. About strategy, legal options, media risks, public perception. About how the school might try to spin the narrative. "We can push the district," Theo said. "File a Title VI complaint. Force an internal investigation. But we need one more thing." "What?" Jaylen asked. "Other voices." He meant witnesses. People who had seen it and were willing to say it. That was the hard part. Because even though half the class had watched it happen, most of them were afraid to speak up. Jaylen understood why. It wasn't just fear of Henderson. It was fear of the school, of retaliation, of being labeled disruptive or difficult. Labels that stick to kids like them and follow them forever. Still, Jaylen knew he had to try. So he started quietly, talking to friends, peers. Maya, the girl with the pencils, was the first to agree. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "He's been like that since freshman year." Then Andre. Then Serena, the girl who filmed it. She hadn't wanted to get involved. But when Jaylen thanked her, her voice cracked. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "I just knew." He couldn't keep doing this. Slowly he gathered names, statements. Enough to show this wasn't a one-time outburst. It was a pattern. But while he built support, Henderson was doing the same. Whispers started. "Jaylen's just trying to get famous. He's exaggerating." He provoked him. Someone even spray-painted "liar" on Jaylen's locker. He didn't react, didn't post about it, didn't give them anything. But it stung. The school district issued a vague statement to the press about ongoing review processes and commitment to equity. Nothing specific, nothing brave. That night, Rochelle sat beside Jaylen and said, "You sure you want to keep going?" He didn't answer right away. Then he's still teaching, still standing in front of kids, still acting like he didn't do anything. She nodded. "Then we keep going." And they did. 2 weeks in, Things reached a boiling point. Jaylen was walking home after school when a black SUV slowed next to him. A man in a suit stepped out. White, maybe mid-40s, said he was from the district. "I just want to talk," he said. Jaylen stared at him. "I'm not supposed to talk without my mom." "I understand," the man replied, too friendly. "But off the record, you're a smart kid. Don't let this mess up your future. You've got potential. Don't throw it away just to make noise." Jaylen didn't say a word. He just took out his phone and started recording. The man blinked. Okay, I see. You're serious." Jaylen didn't flinch. The SUV drove off. That video, short, silent, damning, was posted within the hour. Now, people really started paying attention. News outlets called. Activists reached out. Students from other schools started sharing their own stories. The pressure was building. On the school board, on the district, on Henderson. But with pressure came risk. Jaylen's grades were suddenly under review. 2 teachers stopped calling on him in class. Some kids turned cold. Others grew louder in support, but from the outside. The real test was always what happened when the doors were closed. Jaylen kept going. Because every step forward, every little crack in the wall, it mattered. He was no longer just reacting. He was choosing to push. And soon, something was going to give. Because you can only tighten the lid on the truth for so long before it explodes. The week started with silence. Not the calm kind, the heavy kind. Jaylen sat in the back of class, watching kids avoid his eyes like he was radioactive. The same people who'd reposted the video now acted like they didn't know him. The buzz had faded, the likes slowed, and all that was left was him. The district still hadn't made a decision. Mr. Henderson was on leave, but not fired. The investigation was ongoing. No apology, no accountability. The school was quieter, more tense, like everyone was waiting for something to blow up or disappear. Jaylen had spent the past few weeks speaking up, doing interviews, collecting testimony, even preparing legal paperwork. He thought the truth would be enough. But now, it felt like he was yelling into a void. Then came the betrayal. Theo, his lawyer friend, called one night, sounding angry. "We just got a copy of the district's internal report. They're trying to flip the narrative." "What do you mean?" Jaylen asked. "They're framing it like a misunderstanding, saying there's no conclusive evidence of racial intent." Jaylen's heart dropped. "You saw the video." "I did. Everyone did. But institutions like to protect themselves, not people." Jaylen felt the bottom fall out. So that was it. All that effort, all that vulnerability, and still nothing? He hung up and sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that eats you from the inside out. His mind kept spinning. Maybe I should have just let it go. Maybe they were right. Maybe I made it worse. Maybe nothing ever changes. Later that night, he snapped at his mom during dinner. She asked if he was okay, and he said, too sharply, "I'm not your client." Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes flinched. Jaylen stood up, walked out, and slammed his bedroom door. And for the first time since it started, he broke down. Angry, shaking, ugly crying. Not because of Henderson, not even the school. Because of the weight. The constant, invisible weight of having to be better. Kinder. Smarter. Quieter. Stronger. He wanted to scream. But he didn't. He just curled up in bed, face buried in his pillow, and shut the world out. The next day, he skipped school. Rochelle didn't push. She just left a note on the kitchen table. "You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to keep going. Love you always." Jaylen didn't reply. He stayed home, ate cereal, stared at the walls, scrolled through old messages, support posts from weeks ago that had gone quiet now, DMs from strangers that had since vanished. Even the people who meant well moved on. By evening, he found himself walking aimlessly around the neighborhood. Hoodie up, head down. He didn't want to be seen. Not as the kid on the video, not as the inspiration, not as the brave voice. Just a kid. He ended up at the basketball court down the block. It was empty. He sat on the bench, watched the chain net swing in the wind. Then he heard a voice. "I didn't think you'd come here." It was Maya. She sat down a few feet away, no words at first, just presence. After a minute, she said, "I saw the report. It's garbage." Jaylen didn't respond. They think if they wait long enough, people will forget. Still nothing. She looked at him. "Are you done?" He finally spoke. "I don't know." There was a long silence. Then Maya pulled something out of her bag, a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. He opened it. It was a list. Names. These are other students he's gone after. Some from before you even got here. They're scared to speak. But if you're still in, I can help get them. Jaylen stared at the paper. "You already did what most people wouldn't," she said. "But if you stop now, they win." Jaylen looked up, eyes glassy. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she added. "You just have to be real." That broke something open, but not in a bad way. Something soft cracked inside him. The grief, the pressure, and something deeper beneath it. Hope. Not the loud kind. Not the kind you post. The quiet kind that sits in your chest and says, "This matters." Still, he folded the paper, put it in his pocket, looked at Maya. "I'm not done," he said. She smiled. "Good. 'Cause neither am I." That night, Jaylen went home and sat with his mom. No TV, no distractions, just them. "I want to keep going," he said, "even if they don't listen, even if it hurts." Rochelle looked at him, really looked, then nodded. "I'm with you," she said, "but this time we play louder." Jaylen exhaled, like something had been let go. Not the pain, that was still there, but the doubt. He was bruised, but he wasn't broken. And tomorrow he'd walk into that school, not just as a kid who got humiliated, but as someone who refused to vanish. Something had shifted, not in them, in him, and it was just the beginning. It started with a knock. Jaylen was eating breakfast when his mom opened the door. On the other side stood a woman in a sharp navy suit, holding a leather briefcase and an energy that filled the room before she even spoke. "Ms. Rochelle Williams?" she asked. "I'm Dana Holt, legal counsel for the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights." Jaylen froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "I saw the footage. And, more importantly," Dana said, turning toward Jaylen, "I read your statement. I'd like to talk." They sat at the kitchen table, no formality. Dana pulled out papers, notes, files, but her eyes stayed on Jaylen. "You didn't just report misconduct," she said. "You exposed a culture. The school board should have acted. They didn't. So now it's my office's job to ask, why?" Jaylen felt something shift in the room. Not relief. Not yet, but momentum. Rochelle watched silently, letting her son speak. This was his moment, and he took it. He told Dana everything, from the day in class, to the assistant principal's office, to the SUV on the street. He showed her the threats, the silence, the way his classmates had been punished for backing him. He handed over the list Maya gave him, other students, other stories, years of damage swept under the rug. When he finished, Dana didn't blink. "We'll be opening a formal Title VI investigation," she said, "and we're calling a public hearing." "Hey, what?" Jaylen asked. "Students, staff, families. Everyone gets a chance to speak, and it goes on record." Rochelle nodded slowly. "You're putting it in the light." Dana smiled. "Exactly." Word spread fast. The school board scrambled to contain it. PR emails flew. Talking points were drafted. Henderson was quietly moved into early retirement. No admission of guilt, no public comment. But it was too late. The students were already talking. Maya, Andre, Serena, and more than a dozen others stepped forward. With the Youth Legal Alliance and Dana's team guiding them, they prepared sworn statements, timelines, screenshots. Even kids who'd graduated years ago sent in testimonies from other states. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening, held in the school auditorium. Jaylen walked in that night, wearing a button-up shirt and clean sneakers. Not flashy, just solid. Maya walked beside him. His mom was just behind, calm as ever. The auditorium was packed. Students, parents, reporters, even teachers, some supportive, some skeptical. The board sat in front, trying to look neutral. Dana sat nearby, briefcase closed, but ready. When Jaylen's name was called, the room fell quiet. He stepped up to the microphone. No paper. No notes. Just him. My name is Jaylen Williams, he said. I'm 14. I go to Jefferson High, and I'm here because I was humiliated by a teacher who's been getting away with it for years. He paused. No one breathed. I didn't speak up at first, because I thought no one would believe me. Then I did speak, and they tried to erase me. They moved me, blamed me, silenced people who supported me. But I'm still here. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It just held. This isn't just about one man. This is about a school that protects power instead of people. This is about every student who is told to sit down, stay quiet, and not make trouble. Well, I made trouble. And I'm not sorry. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. Jaylen stepped back, heart pounding. Not with fear, with clarity. One by one, other students followed. Stories spilled out. Years of microaggressions, suspensions, failing grades with no explanation. Staff who turned away. Parents who'd complained and been ignored. It wasn't a hearing. It was an unburial. At one point, Dana stood and read a line from the school's own equity policy, a line about dignity, diversity, and inclusion. She let the words hang there, sharp and absurd in the silence. Then she turned to the board. These students aren't asking for special treatment. They're asking for equal ground. And they're not asking anymore, they're demanding. The room erupted. By the end of the night, the board had no choice. They agreed to a full third-party investigation of Jefferson High. The district's Title VI policy would be rewritten. Henderson would not be returning, ever. And every student who had been retaliated against would have their records reviewed. Jaylen didn't smile. Not then. He just sat quietly, Maya beside him, watching the cracks in the wall finally spread. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And it was real. Back home, Rochelle hugged him tight. You didn't just speak, she whispered. You shifted something. Jaylen didn't say anything. He just exhaled. The kind of breath that had been stuck in his chest since the day it all began. And for the first time in a long time, he felt light. The headlines came fast. Black teen's testimony sparks federal investigation into Georgia school. Students speak out. Pattern of discrimination at Jefferson High. School board under fire for mishandling racism allegations. The story went regional, then national. News vans parked outside the school for days. Reporters waited near the cafeteria. Kids whispered when Jaylen passed in the hallway. Not out of pity anymore, but something closer to respect. But institutions don't go down easy. By Monday, the district had started quietly pushing back. Emails were sent to parents warning of media misrepresentation and ongoing internal reviews. One teacher who spoke in support of the students found herself reassigned to lunchroom duty. Two others who had privately reached out to Jaylen stopped responding entirely. They're tightening the screws, Rochelle said one night over dinner. Classic maneuver. Shift focus. Apply quiet pressure. Jaylen just nodded. He wasn't surprised. He was prepared. That week, someone from the district's legal team called Theo, Jaylen's lawyer, with an alternative resolution proposal. In exchange for dropping the federal complaint, the school offered Jaylen a written apology, a full scholarship to a private high school of his choice, and a community-wide diversity initiative to begin in the fall. It sounded nice. Looked good on paper. But it wasn't justice. Jaylen listened quietly on the call. When Theo asked what he wanted to do, he said, "They want me to disappear. That's what this is. Then we don't settle." He hung up. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about punishment. It was about what people were still pretending not to see. Jaylen knew. If he took the deal, the district would wipe their hands clean and spin it like a solution. Nothing would change. Another kid would walk into that building next year and hear the same subtle violence in every hallway, every side comment, every unexplained detention. He wouldn't be part of that cycle. And now he didn't have to be. By the end of the week, things shifted again. The Department of Education sent their investigators to the school, real ones, not from the district, federal. Sharp suits, clipboards, real questions. They didn't interview students in offices. They sat with them in the library, listened, took notes, gave them space. Jaylen watched from a distance as Maya gave her statement, calm and clear. Andre spoke too. So did Serena. And more followed. By Thursday, the tone in school had changed completely. Mr. Henderson's nameplate was gone. His classroom locked. Teachers were suddenly professional, overly cautious. Some even polite. The assistant principal, who once lectured Jaylen about disrespect, barely made eye contact now. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the recognition of power shifted. Jaylen didn't weaponize it. He didn't walk around gloating. He just was. Present. Unafraid. The following week, something small but powerful happened. Ms. Ramirez, the librarian, called Jaylen in after school. I know everything's been loud lately, she said, but I wanted you to see this. She handed him a box. Inside were notes. Dozens of them. Folded up notebook paper, sticky notes, printouts. All handwritten or typed by students. Thank you for speaking. I didn't know I could say anything until you did. You made me feel seen. Jaylen stood there, speechless. It's not always the headlines that matter, she said gently. Sometimes the quiet things are the ones that last. He nodded slowly, swallowed hard. He didn't cry, but he felt it. All of it. The pressure, the cost, the impact, and now the return. One day after school, as he packed up his things, Jaylen noticed a group of freshmen watching him. One of them walked over, a short kid, nervous energy, maybe 13. Hey, the kid mumbled. Just wanted to say what you did. That was brave. Jaylen smiled a little. Thanks. The kid shifted, then asked, do you think it's different now? Like for real? Jaylen looked around the hallway. The lockers, the quiet hum of footsteps, the same walls, but something felt different. It's starting to be, he said, and that was the truth. Not everything had changed. The board hadn't resigned. Racism hadn't vanished. But the silence was broken. The system had been forced to look in the mirror. And the boy who once stood in shame in the middle of class, he now stood with the weight of truth behind him and the strength of knowing he'd never be invisible again. It didn't come with a trophy. There were no fireworks, no big speeches, no slow-motion standing ovations. Recognition came quietly like it often does. On a Tuesday, Jaylen was sitting in the library after school, working on a civics paper, when Ms. Green, the assistant principal, approached his table. She stood there for a second, unsure, then finally said, "Can we talk?" Jaylen looked up. He remembered this woman, how she had called him in that office weeks ago and told him to de-escalate. The one who let Mr. Henderson's report stand without question. He closed his laptop, nodded once. Sure. She sat across from him, nervous, hands folding and unfolding. I've been reading everything, she said. The investigation reports. The testimonies. I've had some time to reflect. Jaylen didn't say anything. I need to tell you something, she said, voice low. I was wrong. That hit harder than he expected. I thought I was protecting the school, she continued, keeping things calm. I didn't realize that by doing that I was protecting harm, not peace. Still, Jaylen stayed quiet. He wanted to believe her. But he'd learned that words didn't always mean change. But then she did something different. She pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. I found this while going through some archived student files, she said. It's from 6 years ago. A complaint from a former student about Mr. Henderson. It was never processed, never followed up on. That was on me. Jaylen stared at the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. I'm sorry, she said, eyes glassy. Not because you forced us to see it, but because you shouldn't have had to. That weight should never have been yours. Jaylen looked at her, steady. Then, after a moment, he nodded. Thank you for saying that, he said. Really. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And it was honest. That same week, Jaylen was called into a student leadership meeting by the new interim principal. Not a board-appointed figurehead, but someone who had actually taught in the district for years and stayed quiet watching until the system cracked open. We want to create a student equity council, the principal explained. Not for show, not performative. Real seats at the table, real decisions. We want you to be a part of it or lead it if you're willing. Jaylen sat there, stunned for a moment. Then he said, "Only if it's not just me." They nodded. "Bring whoever you want. Build the team." So he did. Maya, Andre, Serena, a few underclassmen, even students who hadn't spoken up before but had stories to tell. For the first time, their school wasn't something being done to them. It was something they could help shape. Later that month, the school hosted an open forum, an idea Jaylen had proposed himself, not just for students, but for parents, teachers, alumni, a real space for people to talk about what they'd been through and what they wanted to see change. Jaylen didn't speak first. He didn't need to. Others did. A black mother stood up and said, "My daughter was in that same classroom 2 years ago. She came home crying more times than I can count. I'm here because I never got the chance to say something back then, but I'm saying it now because of him." She looked at Jaylen, her voice breaking. Later, an older teacher, white, gray-haired, 1 foot in retirement, stood and said, "I was afraid to speak before. That's on me. I saw things. I stayed quiet. And this young man here reminded me that silence is a choice, and sometimes it's a coward's one." Jaylen swallowed hard. He wasn't used to hearing that from grown-ups, not in public. And it wasn't about praise. It was about truth, a truth too long buried, finally rising. A few days later, in the mail, Jaylen received a letter. It had no return address, no name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with messy handwriting. "I was in that classroom. I didn't say anything. I should have. I'm sorry. You did what I couldn't. Thank you." Jaylen folded it slowly and placed it in a box on his nightstand. The same box that now held notes from students, the investigation summary, and the list Maya gave him weeks ago. A box of pain, yes, but also proof. Proof that words, when used right, carry weight, that silence broken can ripple outward, that even when it feels like no one's listening, someone always is. Recognition didn't change who Jaylen was. He still walked home every day, still liked puzzles, still sat with Maya at lunch, still kept mostly to himself. But now, when he spoke, people listened, not because he shouted, but because he'd earned the right to be heard. And he never used that voice to hurt, never to humiliate, just to guide, to include, to make room for others, because he hadn't forgotten how it felt to stand alone. And now he was determined to make sure the next kid wouldn't have to. It had been almost 6 months. The investigation had wrapped. The school had implemented new equity policies. The board had been forced to publicly acknowledge its failures. And Henderson? Gone. Not just retired, removed, without honors, without fanfare. Jaylen didn't celebrate. He didn't post about it, didn't throw shade. That wasn't his way. He just kept moving. He showed up to class. He sat in the front now, not out of defiance, out of choice. And people noticed. There was a quiet shift in the school. Not perfect, not overnight, but real. Teachers asked more questions. Students spoke more freely. The posters about diversity on the walls finally had weight behind them, not just slogans. But Jaylen's attention had already turned to something else. Freshmen, the ones just walking in, wide-eyed, anxious, still figuring out how to move through the system without getting swallowed by it. That's where Jaylen saw the next step. So he started staying after school. Not in the principal's office or in front of a camera, in the back of the library. At first, it was just him and Maya. Then Andre joined. Then a few more. Word spread, not loud, just enough. And soon, every Thursday, that corner of the library became something different. A safe space. A place where kids could talk, really talk, without fear of detention or judgment. They called it the table. No sign, no faculty, no pressure. Just open chairs, real talk, and one unspoken rule: listen before you speak. Jaylen didn't lead with speeches. He asked questions. What do you wish someone told you when you were in middle school? What's something a teacher said to you that still stings? Who would you be if you didn't have to shrink for anyone? And then he'd let them talk. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes someone cried. Once, a quiet kid named Kamari told the group that his teacher called him aggressive for asking why he got a 0 on a group project. Jaylen didn't interrupt, just nodded. Later, he pulled Kamari aside and said, "That's not about you. That's about them. You did right to ask." Kamari blinked like no one had ever said that to him before. He came back every week after that. One day, Jaylen was walking past the counselor's office when he saw a girl sitting on the bench, tears in her eyes. Freshman, nervous, small. He stopped, crouched beside her. "You good?" She wiped her face, quickly. "I got sent out of class. I didn't even do anything." He nodded. "Been there." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Wait, you're Jaylen, right? The one from the video?" He smiled. "That's one way to describe me." She sniffled, then whispered, "Was it worth it?" Jaylen didn't answer right away. He looked around, the hall, the walls, the open office door. Then he looked back at her. He said, "It didn't feel like it at first. But yeah, it was." Then he added, "You coming to the table next Thursday?" She nodded, slowly. "Good," he said. "We saved you a seat." That night, Jaylen walked home slower than usual. It was warm out. The trees were just starting to change. When he got home, he opened the box on his nightstand. The same box he kept everything in. The anonymous letter, the notes from students, the list Maya had given him, the old screenshot of Henderson's classroom schedule. He added something new, a photo someone had printed from the hearing. It was him at the mic, standing tall, head lifted, expression steady. He wasn't keeping it to remember the pain. He was keeping it to remember what came after. The choice to stay visible, to stay kind, to keep showing up. Because legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about leaving something behind that kept working after you walked away. Months later, a new student joined the school, a boy from a different district, already labeled disruptive. He was quiet, wary, shoulders always tight. He didn't trust anyone. But one day, he passed the library and heard laughter. Not loud, just real. He stepped inside. Someone waved him over. "Hey," Maya said, "grab a seat. You're welcome here." The boy hesitated. Then he looked at the center of the circle and saw Jaylen. Sitting there listening, nodding. No spotlight, no title, just present. The boy sat down. And just like that, the work continued. At first, the changes felt small. A new principal, a few new teachers, a bulletin board near the main office where students could anonymously report incidents. And this time, someone actually checked it. A monthly equity forum hosted by students, not faculty. Jaylen didn't run it. He didn't have to. It wasn't about him anymore. That was the point. But then the impact started to grow beyond Jefferson High. An article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a full piece on the student who challenged silence. It didn't use Jaylen's full name. He asked them not to, but people knew. It talked about the hearing, the testimony, the aftermath, the civil rights investigation, the table, emails poured in. From teachers. I watched the hearing with my staff. It made us realize how much we've ignored. I showed your story in my classroom. Kids were stunned. Then they started talking. From students. We printed out your speech and read it in homeroom. Our school just started a student-led committee because of what you did. I used to think it was just me, but you made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Even from parents. My son is quiet like you. He's been dealing with this for years. We never knew how to help. Until now. Jaylen would sit in his room at night, reading them, not with pride exactly, more like awe. He had never wanted to be a symbol. He still didn't. But somehow his story had opened a door, and people were walking through it. A few months later, Rochelle was invited to speak at a legal education panel in Atlanta. She brought Jaylen with her, not as a guest, but as part of the discussion. It was held at a university law center with lawyers, educators, and policy leaders in attendance. Jaylen didn't want to go at first. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "You don't have to be," Rochelle replied. "You lived it." So he went. He sat on stage next to his mom, and when a moderator asked him, "What do schools need to understand about students like you?" he didn't pause. "They don't need to understand us," he said. "They need to listen to us." The room went silent. Then applause. A lawyer in the back said, Would you ever consider coming to speak to our Board of Education? Jaylen blinked. I don't know, he said. Honestly, I'm still in school. Everyone laughed, not at him, but with him. And in that moment, Jaylen realized something. He wasn't finished. He was just starting. Back at Jefferson, life went on. There were still bad days. Kids still got labeled for being too loud or too smart or too different. But now they had language for it, space for it, and, more than anything, each other. Kamari, the quiet freshman from earlier, had started mentoring two younger kids. Maya had taken over organizing the table. Andre helped lead a school podcast about student life and voice. And Jaylen? He kept showing up. Not for credit, not for praise, but because once you know the system can be different, you can't pretend anymore. You build something better, even if it's slow, especially if it's slow. One afternoon, Jaylen stood outside the school, watching parents pick up their kids. He noticed a boy, maybe 6th grade, maybe new, looking lost, backpack slipping off his shoulder. He looked unsure of everything. Jaylen walked over. You good, he asked. The boy nodded too fast. Yeah, I don't know where the buses are. Jaylen pointed. Over there. Last 2 rows. The boy nodded again. Thanks. Jaylen turned to leave, then stopped. Hey, if anybody gives you trouble, come find me. The boy looked up, surprised. Okay. Jaylen smiled. Welcome to Jefferson. At home, that night, Rochelle came into his room with a box. What's that? He asked. She handed it to him. Mail came today. From the district. Inside was a plaque. A real one. In recognition of Jaylen Williams, for courage, integrity, and changing the way we listen. There was no press release. No photo op. Just the plaque. Jaylen held it for a long time, then set it down on his desk next to his books, his pencils, and the box of folded letters from students who, like him, once thought no one would listen. Now they did. Not perfectly. Not always. But enough. And sometimes that's where change begins. The school year was almost over. The trees outside Jefferson High were blooming again, the same way they had been when it all started. Same halls. Same lockers. Same walk to school. But Jaylen was different now. Not louder. Not more confident. Just more himself. There wasn't a single event that marked the end of the journey. No final confrontation. No last debate. Just a series of small moments that made him realize he'd stepped into something new. A few weeks before graduation, he walked into his old history classroom, the one Henderson used to run. It had a new teacher now, a younger black man named Mr. Carter who greeted every student at the door, knew their names, and didn't just assign readings. He asked questions that made the room lean in. Jaylen wasn't there as a student. He was helping organize end-of-year presentations. But when he stepped inside, a few kids looked up, eyes widening. You're Jaylen, one said. Jaylen nodded. I used to sit in that corner, he said, pointing to the back row. The student looked over. What was it like? Jaylen smiled faintly. It was quiet. Mr. Carter walked over and said, He's the reason we have this class project. Credit where it's due. Jaylen looked down, a little embarrassed, then up again. Nah, he said, Y'all are the reason it keeps going. That weekend, Jaylen took a walk through his neighborhood. No music. No distractions, just air, just space. He passed the basketball court, the corner store, the church with the cracked bell, places that had always been there, unchanged. But in his chest, something had changed. He reached the old library, the one where the table had started. It was closed for the day, but he sat outside on the steps, remembering. He remembered the weight of silence, the sting of being made to feel small. The shaking in his hands when he first spoke out, and he remembered the moment he stood in front of a full auditorium and chose to speak anyway. He took out his phone and opened the anonymous letter he had taken a photo of months ago. I should have said something. You did what I couldn't. Jaylen stared at the screen, then closed his eyes. There was no anger left, just space. And in that space, a kind of peace he hadn't known he needed. Later that night, he sat with his mom on the couch. No news on. No work in her lap. Just a bowl of popcorn and a quiet house. They didn't talk about the school or the investigation. or what came next. They just sat. And when Jaylen leaned his head on her shoulder, she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She knew. He had found his way through it. Not by becoming someone else, but by holding on to who he was. The next morning, Jaylen walked into school and passed a bulletin board by the main office. There was a new poster on it: Student Equity Ambassadors, Applications Open. Underneath, a quote in simple black letters: "Speak, even if your voice shakes. Someone is listening." There was no name attached, but Jaylen smiled, because he remembered writing that in one of the early table sessions, not thinking it would last, and now it had. Not because he shouted, not because he fought back harder than anyone else, but because he stayed present, stayed kind, stayed real. That's what they couldn't erase. That's what made it permanent. As the final bell of the year rang out across the campus, students poured into the hallways. Laughter, backpack swinging, paper in the air. Jaylen didn't rush. He walked slowly, letting it all wash over him. He passed a group of younger students at their lockers. One of them looked up and asked, "You going to the rally next week?" Jaylen shrugged. "Maybe." The kid grinned. "You should. We kind of started it because of you." Jaylen blinked. "Oh, okay. Then, yeah, I'll be there." They both laughed. He turned the corner, stepped outside. Sunlight hit his face. He paused, then took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs and settles something in your chest. And with no audience, no spotlight, no pressure, he smiled, just a quiet, real smile, and kept walking. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He was trying to make sure the next kid didn't have to fight just to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.